There are some things that you probably shouldn't say to your boss. He's currently in the process of moving from Edmonton to Calgary, and his possessions are expected to arrive sometime this week, including his prize Martin guitar. Another one of my colleagues also plays guitar, and so the two of them were engaged in an enthusiastic conversation about musicality and influences. Me, not wanting to feel left out, waited patiently for a chance to pipe in, anxious to showcase what little knowledge I have left over from my music store days. Unfortunately, I learned a lesson in timing and delivery. Me: "So, manager, have you ever tried a tailor before?" Timing and delivery is not just about when to say something, but context is also very important. Because my manager has never heard of the Taylor brand of guitars before, and because my manager prefers to wear tattered golf shirts to work, this is what he heard. "Have you ever used a tailor before?" And so, a moment of awkward silence ensued for what seemed like an eternity as he looked down at his fashion choices. Thankfully, my colleague who plays guitars is familiar with this brand and rescued me. He said, "Oh, you mean Taylor guitars? Yeah, they're awesome." Even more thankfully, my manager is a pretty easygoing guy, so we had a pretty big chuckle over this. By the time 4 p.m. rolled around, I was pretty exhausted, having spent most of the day poring intensely over spreadsheets. I was already debating with myself whether or not to go to the seat that night. I just wanted to lay my head down and close my eyes. Well, I toughed it out to 6:30 and headed over, thinking that maybe having something to eat might help to change my state of mind. When I got there, we actually had a meeting because they were rolling out a new program, so no food. That night, I was assigned to the task of serving, and I thought that actually wasn't too bad of a task to get me through the night, because carrying food on trays to our guests is a pretty mindless task. Because of the new program, there weren't that many guests that night, and so it was pretty clear that there were way too many servers. So, rather than standing and waiting with a tray of food, I handed my plates over to one of my fellow servers and decided to walk around. I sat beside one of our guests, an elderly gentleman with a crooked nose and about 2 days' worth of beard growth. And he looked at me with hazy eyes as I asked him, "How are you?" And he said, "How are you?" I said, "I'm fine." And he said, "I'm fine." Curiously, I asked him, "So how did you like tonight's dinner?" And he said, "So how did you like tonight's dinner?" What? But before I let my imagination of what a conversation with a man who repeated everything I said get the better of me, we actually started talking. We talked about the recent cold weather that has swept into Calgary, and he asked me if I had enough blankets. Huh? I told him I had one, and he was surprised. He had 3 blankets and he offered me one. I politely declined and told him that actually my blanket was a cover and that it was pretty thick, but thanks. I walked around some more and sat beside another gentleman who was eating by himself, finishing off his 3rd helping of delicious macaroni. I asked him how his week went, and he replied to me in a rather quiet voice that it was pretty lonely. You see, he had just lost his wife, and he's reluctant in calling his family, because each time he calls, they think that he's calling from a bar, and this often leads to some fundamental right-wing scorning. I had a pretty decent conversation with him. So, at the end of the night, despite having spent more than an hour than I told myself that I would, I was thoroughly refreshed. Any hint of previous fatigue was gone. It's amazing that good conversation can really help to lift the spirit. And that's the cool thing about the seed. Often one goes with the attitude of, how can I help you? But what I've discovered is that it's usually the other way around. My private prayer each time I go is to meet Jesus there. And every time that I've gone, he has shown up, each time with a different guest.